Managers usually work long hours, so they don't have time to read about other firms or broaden their perspectives. It's important to study this while in university. Ideas come from university and broad perspectives should be generic skills for managers. That's why the best managers are not necessarily the most experienced. It's not supposed to be the people who work their way up the ladder. One of the social issues faced by the state of Alaska is the lack of mental and emotional well-being of the native Alaskans. It is very unfortunate that many of the Native Americans are living under poor conditions throughout the country. In the cases of Native Alaskans, even virtually entire villages are suffering from a lack of mental and emotional well-being, which includes continuing poor physical and mental health. Alcohol abuse, domestic violence, homicides, and suicides are frequent among them, which of course, lead to families falling apart. It is tragic to see that many children are abused and not educated properly. As a matter of fact, the children themselves are abusing alcohol and other chemicals, and the rate is increasing over the time. Since parents are suffering from mental illnesses and alcohol abuse, they can't take care of their children, so many children are being taken care of by others or simply neglected. Therefore, we can conclude that Alaskan natives are losing hold of their communities, cultural identities, and most importantly, their childhoods. So you can see how serious the issue is. Plus, rather than making a living for themselves, they are depending on public services and subsidies. They have lost control of and responsibility for their economy and governing institutions. But you can see from the relatively crooked and narrow streets of the city of Rome as they look from above today, you can see that again, the city grew in a fairly ad hoc way, as I mentioned. It wasn't planned all at once. It just grew up over time, beginning in the 8th century BC. Now this is interesting. Because what we know about the Romans is when they were left to their own devices and they could build the city from scratch, they didn't let it grow in an ad hoc way. They structured it. In a very methodical way. That was basically based on military strategy, military planning. The Romans, they couldn't have conquered the world without obviously having a masterful military enterprise. And everywhere they went on their various campaigns, their various military campaigns, they would build camps, and those camps were always laid out in a very geometric plan along a grid, usually square or rectangular. For centuries, boys were top of the class. But these days, that's no longer the case. A new study by the OECD, a club of mostly rich countries, examined how 15-year-old boys and girls performed at reading, mathematics, and science. Boys still score somewhat better at maths, and in science the genders are roughly equal. But when it comes to the students who really struggle, the difference is stark. Boys are 50% more likely than girls to fall short of basic standards in all three areas. Researchers suggest that doing homework set by teachers is linked to better performance in maths, reading, and science. Boys, it appears, spend more of their free time in the virtual world. They are 17% more likely than girls to play collaborative online games than girls every day. They also use the internet more. Third, peer pressure plays a role. A lot of boys decide early on that they are just too cool for school, which means they're more likely to be rowdy in class. Teachers mark them down for this. In anonymous tests, boys perform better. In fact, the gender gap in reading drops by a third when teachers don't know the gender of the pupil they are marking. So what can be done to close this gap? Getting boys to do more homework and cut down on screen time would help. But most of all, abandoning gender stereotypes would benefit all students. Boys in countries with the best schools read much better than girls. And girls in Shanghai excel in mathematics. They outperform boys from anywhere else in the world. I understand your professor has been discussing several eastern woodland Indian tribes in your study of Native American cultures. As you have probably learned, the eastern woodland Indians get their name from the forest-covered areas of the eastern United States where they lived. The earliest woodland cultures date back 9,000 years, but the group will focus on dates back only to about 700 AD. We now call these Native Americans the Mississippian culture, because they settled in the Mississippi River Valley. This civilization is known for its flat-topped monuments called temple mounds. They were made of earth and used as temples and official residences. The temple mounds were located in the central square of the city, with the huts of the townspeople built in rows around the plaza. The Mississippian people were city dwellers. But some city residents earned their living as farmers, tending the fields of corn, beans, and squash that surrounded the city. The city's artisans made arrowheads, leather goods, pottery, and jewelry. Traders came from far away to exchange raw materials for these items. In the slides I'm about to show, you will see models of a Mississippian city. Child language acquisition, 3 little words. So let's take them on at a time. Child, when to start being a child. For many people, language acquisition starts around about 12 months when kids say their first word, but don't forget the first year. At the first year, our first year of life is very important as well, and indeed before you are born. Remember, there are a couple of months before you are born, when you're actually able to perceive in the womb something of the language that's around you. So language acquisition starts earlier than most people think. And it also ends later than most people think. When page 163 of 492 practice PTE with AI scoring at Puny PTE monthly priority materials at www.apuny.com. Does child language acquisition stop? Well, in a sense, we are all children, we stay being children all in our lives. There is no obvious endpoint for learning sounds. Of course, there is for learning grammar, there is for vocabulary, I mean that goes on for the rest of our lives in million or more words in English. Most of us only have a vocabulary of 50, 60, 70,000 words, whatever it is, until there is always something to learn. So remember that two ends of child language acquisition are wider apart than some people think. That means there is more scope for studying in it than most people think. Frogs are a diverse and largely carnivorous group of short-bodied, tailless amphibians composing the order Anura. The oldest fossil proto-frog appeared in the early Triassic of Madagascar, but molecular clock dating suggests their origins may extend further back to the Permian, 265 million years ago. Frogs are widely distributed, ranging from the tropics to subarctic regions, but the greatest concentration of species diversity is found in tropical rainforests. There are approximately 4,800 recorded species, accounting for over 85% of extant amphibian species. They are also one of the 5 most diverse vertebrate orders. Besides living in fresh water and on dry land, the adults of some species are adapted for living underground or in trees. Adult frogs generally have a carnivorous diet consisting of small invertebrates, but omnivorous species exist and a few feed on fruit. Frogs are extremely efficient at converting what they eat into body mass. They are an important food source for predators and part of the food web dynamics of many of the world's ecosystems. The skin is semi-permeable, making them susceptible to dehydration, so they either live in moist places or have special adaptations to deal with dry habitats. Frogs produce a wide range of vocalizations, particularly in their breeding season, and exhibit many different kinds of complex behaviors to attract mates, to fend off predators and to generally survive. Frog populations have declined significantly since the 1950s. More than 1/3 of species are considered to be threatened with extinction and over 120 are believed to have become extinct since the 1980s. The number of malformations among frogs is on the rise and an emerging fungal disease, chytridiomycosis, has spread around the world. Conservation biologists are working to understand the causes of these problems and to resolve them. Frogs are valued as food by humans and also have many cultural roles in literature, symbolism, and religion. In a video, a woman talking about the effects of the internet on children development, including positive effects and negative effects such as access to pornography sites and the roles of parents and teachers and policymakers on this phenomenon. Most Americans take energy for granted. But for many families, maintaining access to reliable and affordable energy is a persistent challenge and a significant material hardship. This is a problem page 164 of 492. Practice PTE with AIR scoring APUNI PTE monthly priority materials at www.apuni.com referred to as energy insecurity, and it affects millions of American households each year. We have found that energy insecurity is a growing and vexing problem among low-income households, and the COVID-19 pandemic has made this problem worse. Our analysis finds that there are disparities in rates of energy insecurity across various socio-demographic groups. Black and Hispanic households, for example, are significantly more likely to experience energy insecurity and face utility disconnection than white households. So too are households with young children, individuals that require electronic medical devices, and those in dwellings with inefficient or poor conditions. Households that cannot pay for energy are unable to power electronic learning or medical devices, keep perishable, healthy food in the refrigerator, or maintain safe body temperatures. Under conditions of extreme heat or cold, people can suffer from mental and physical health consequences, including the possibility of death. Strategies for coping with uncomfortable temperatures, such as burning trash or sitting in one's car with the heat running, can lead to tragic outcomes as well. Our research underscores the importance of public policy that targets energy insecurity and its underlying causes. Weatherization assistance, incentives for residential solar power, energy bill assistance, and utility disconnection protections are all viable strategies for helping the millions of households across the country that are currently unable to pay their energy bills. So the pace at which human minds have evolved over the last 500,000 years and more recently the last 200,000 years, has been so frighteningly rapid that the evolution of cognitive function and perception can only occur in a small number of genes. If one needed to adapt dozens of genes changes in concert, in order to acquire the penetrating minds that we now have, which our ancestors 5,000 years ago didn't have, the evolution could not have taken place, it could not have occurred so quickly. And for that reason alone, one begins to really suspect that the genetic differences between people who lived 5,000 years ago is evidence that the difference between their cognitive functions and ours is not actually as large. Therefore, a rather small number of genes may be responsible for the powerful minds that humans have, which most of us now possess. M1. We are going to start Chapter 3 today. The chapter is on cave paintings. Who can tell us about cave paintings? M2. The drawings are mostly of animals. M1. Correct. The animals are mostly bison, horses, and deer. The most common themes in cave paintings are large, wild animals such as bison, horses, aurochs, and deer. Anthropologist Abbe Broy interpreted the paintings as being hunting magic. That is to say, they were meant to increase the number of animals. Drawings of humans are rare and are usually schematic rather than the more naturalistic animal subjects. Who can guess when cave painting started? W1. Prehistoric times. M1. Yes. The paintings were made during the Upper Paleolithic, about 40,000 years ago. Let me ask you another question. Who drew the paintings? W1. Artists. M1. Good answer, but who were the artists? What were their positions? W2. Tribal leaders? M1. Close, but incorrect. The artists were believed to be respected elders or shamans. The main colors of the paintings were limited to yellow, brown, charcoal, red, hematite, and manganese oxide. About hazardous chemical products with a picture of the front and back side of a pesticide pot. There is a lawn in front of the front side of the pot. A warning label is attached to the back side of the pot. The label is badly designed because the font in it is so small that many people possibly can't see it clearly. 60% of people can't see the font, below 10? Clearly. 40% of Americans are illiterate, who can't understand the label and thus ignore the danger of the products. You might think that most of the patients at sleep clinics are being treated for sleeplessness, commonly referred to as insomnia, but that is not the case. The majority of sleep clinic patients suffer from disorders of excessive sleep, or hypersomnia. While most insomniacs somehow manage to drag themselves through the day and function at acceptable, although not optimal levels, this is not so for people who suffer from hypersomnia. They are incapacitated by irresistible urges to sleep during the day, often in inappropriate situations at business meetings, in supermarkets, or at parties. Even more dangerous is their failure to remain awake when driving or operating machinery. Falling asleep in such situations could obviously be life-threatening. Many hypersomniacs suffer from narcolepsy, for which the primary symptom is excessive daytime sleepiness. Though not apparent in childhood, this symptom most often appears for the first time during the teen years and continues throughout a person's life. The sleep attacks may occur as many as 15 to 20 times during the course of the day and last for periods from 15 minutes up to 2 hours. What can be done to help those suffering from narcolepsy? There are certain drugs that can help, and specialists suggest voluntary napping to decrease the frequency of such sleep attacks. Look at any photo of Earth's night side, and you see the planet lit up like a Christmas decoration. As the glowing lights of bustling cities expand, the serenity of natural darkness wanes. But the repercussions are not just the loss of the starry night sky. Light pollution also affects animals who depend on a nighttime environment to survive. Many bird species use the stars to navigate at night. Baby sea turtles use moonlight reflected off the ocean to guide them back to the water. City lights can confuse them, and fear them off course. Humans are not immune, either. Excessive exposure to artificial light at night can increase the risk of sleep disorders, and it's also been linked to obesity, depression, diabetes, and even cancer. Paris is very old. There has been a settlement there for at least 6,000 years, and its shape has been determined in part by the River Seine, and in part by the edicts of France's rulers. But the great boulevards we admire today are relatively new, and were constructed to prevent any more barricades being created by the rebellious population. That work was carried out in the middle 19th century. The earlier Paris had been in part a maze of narrow streets and alleyways. But you can imagine that the work was not only highly expensive, but caused great distress among the 500,000 or so residents whose houses were simply razed, and whose neighborhoods disappeared. What is done cannot usually be undone, especially when buildings are torn down. Most people think of astronomers as people who spend their time in cold observatories peering through telescopes every night. In fact, a typical astronomer spends most of his or her time analyzing data and may only be at the telescope a few weeks of the year. Some astronomers work on purely theoretical problems and never use a telescope at all. You might not know how rarely images are viewed directly through telescopes. The most common way to observe the skies is to photograph them. The process is very simple. First, a photographic plate is coated with a light-sensitive material. The plate is positioned so that the image received by the telescope is recorded on it. Then the image can be developed, enlarged, and published so that many people can study it. Because most astronomical objects are very remote, the light we receive from them is rather feeble. But by using a telescope as a camera, long-time exposures can be made. In this way, objects can be photographed that are 100 times too faint to be seen by just looking through a telescope. Nikola Tesla, living under the shadow of Thomas Edison. Tesla is less alone, but his theories have given him a special place in the field. Here we try to showcase some interesting facts that have come to light about Tesla. He was an electric engineer and a physicist of repute. He had over 300 patents credited to him, but he became famous for developing the alternate current technology, which has a wide variety of uses. He was known for his terrific sense of humor. The museum in Wardenclyffe was funded by a cartoon showing the respect people had for his humor. Tesla, in the initial years, worked for Thomas Edison designing direct current generators. He moved away to pursue his own research. Though people described them as rivals, the fact of matter is that they were two sides of a coin. Tesla was at heart an environmentalist and was concerned about the way people were using the resources. He looked for ways to make renewable resources. In fact, he created artificial lightning in his lab and found differences in electric potential on Earth and high objects. As early as 1901, he had ideas about smartphone technology. He was a brilliant thinker but could not put his thoughts and ideas into practice. Tesla never bothered about monetary gains for his research and many a time did not have funds to work on his ideas. People term him a brilliant thinker and humanist. It is said that he had an earthquake mission in his lab and many occasions he would frighten the entire neighborhood when he used it. It is said that Mark Twain was one of the victims of this exercise.